Grand Rising, everybody. Natalie coming to Live Spirit and Coffee. Got my coffee here. Oh my God, so good. I've been trying out this new regimen, right? Like this new schedule, and it's not working out very good. So, got to kind of reassess and reestablish what the heck I'm going to do. So, but all is good. Yesterday didn't come on because I've been feeling so lethargic. So please, I just say to my listeners, check your health, check your blood, make sure that your vitamin D is good. Make sure that you are getting all the nutrients you need. And make sure that there's not something going on with you, because I'm a mess at this point and I'm super tired and I have some health stuff going on. So, and excuse me, I have to replug this beautiful computer in. Okay, so let's get started. Something so cool that I just found out, right? As you guys may or may not know, I'm in a program right now, master's program at John F. Kennedy University, and it is in the School of Psychology. And you could be under the transpersonal psychology, but it's consciousness and transformative studies. And one of the classes we're taking is transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal meaning spiritual, the spiritual and the personal, right? These trance experiences of reaching higher levels of consciousness, or non-ordinary states of consciousness, or picking from the unconscious. So it kind of goes into our shadow side and sort of what does our spiritual world look like? How does that look? Now, it's different for everybody. So it's so vast because the spiritual realm is not just one thing, and it's not nearly close to the three-dimensional time space that we experience here in this world at all. In fact, just think of your dreams. There's no similarities, really. I mean, there might be people and there might be structures, but you can go from one scene to the next. I mean, it's like a quantum realm. You don't even know where you're going to end up sometimes, or what the heck is going to happen, right? Dreams are pretty crazy. Anyway, we did a whole thing on dreams if you're interested to listen to that. Let me get my coffee started. Kind of a mess here. But one thing that has come up that I want to talk about, which is really kind of cool, and I didn't even know this existed. Of course, you learn something new all the time, right? That's there. You can never know everything. But there's this thing called spiritual emergence, and it's in the School of Transpersonal Psychology. And so what it is that you can actually be diagnosed with this and treated by a counselor for this, which is the emerging state of new spiritual awakening, or whatever you want to call it, or emergence, right? They're called spiritual emergence, or a spiritual emergency. So kind of cool. So I'm going to read some of the stuff that it says here, just to give you guys an idea. Hopefully people will start listening to this, because I didn't know this existed. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, I don't know. But it could be covered under insurance if you're going through, like I have some viewers and listeners on here at times that have sort of had this epiphany. Their whole spiritual world has been shifted and changed. This is the place for you, yes. Because we do talk about that. Like, how do we honor those spiritual emergence that happen? Like, how do we honor when we have an epiphany, or something new arises within us that changes our paradigm, our worldview, the way that we see the world spiritually. Sometimes people go from atheism into believing, and all of a sudden everything's changed. But how do we deal with the world around us? It's almost like we have to let go of the old part of ourselves, and most people don't even tend to like that, right? We could look at our family, we look at the people around us, and they tend to get uncomfortable when we're not the same person over and over again. They typically want us to look the same, act the same, be the same, but then we have this maybe spiritual emergency, right? That happens, or a crisis that happens, that develops, right? And then we say, oh my God, like, I'm somebody new. Well, you can actually be diagnosed, and that's kind of cool. And I think it's cool to be diagnosed as having a spiritual emergency so that you can talk to maybe a therapist or someone who deals with the shadow side of things. And then your insurance may pay for it, which is kind of, I didn't even know this. I was like, whoa, well, that's cool that they're starting to recognize that, what the clinical psychology calls people crazy. And in the past, they used to shock people, right? They would, well, something's wrong with you. We need to do shock therapy. And they tortured people that were having what I would call a spiritual uh, um, emergency. They were having these spiritual connections that nobody could understand, right? Like sometimes schizophrenia. Now I'm not saying that sometimes people don't get lost in that. And I think that's where maybe the mental illness is like, how do we bring people back to earth and remember that they're here? And then they can go from that spiritual world back to living in this functional world. Because they are human, right? They are here in the human world. So, spiritual emergency was once dismissed by psychiatric and psychotherapeutic establishment as merely a form of mental illness, requiring immediate medication and hospitalization in order to end it as soon as possible. This misdiagnosis and mistreatment aborted an otherwise growthful process of psychospiritual change. There have been numerous reported cases of individuals having their process frozen through medication and attended psychiatric treatment. When the process becomes suspended like this, the individual is unable to complete the process and ends up feeling ashamed and hurt by the misdiagnosis and mishandling, sometimes feeling doomed to having a lifelong mental illness, which is actually but an artifact of this. I don't even know what that word is, iatrogenic mistreatment. So then what they said is the spiritual emergency is one area where the field of transpersonal psychology has had a significant impact on the larger field of psychology and psychiatry. Sorry. The most recent edition and diagnostic and statistical manual of the American Psychiatry Association, DSM, 4, with the guidance of several transpersonally oriented psychologists and psychiatrists, now includes spiritual emergency as a diagnostic category under the classification of spiritual religious problem. Here's the deal. I love it. I love that they're at least acknowledging in the School of Psychology and in clinics that we can now diagnose people with a spiritual religious problem so that we can start to treat people in a different way, right? It's a non-pathological V code, which may be a focus of treatment. So the treatment itself is not treating you like there's something wrong with you. If you're going through a spiritual emergency, if you're experiencing a transformation in your life where you're like, what the hell is going on? Things have shifted, things have changed for me, that you then can actually work with your psychologist if you have any, or if you're working with somebody and you could be diagnosed with this. Pretty kind of crazy. Now, where the diagnosis is accepted, I'm not 100% sure. I think maybe just the Western world. I don't know about other countries, but I do know that here in America, the Western world, you can say that I want to be diagnosed with having a spiritual or religious problem. Perhaps you can see a counselor who works with what we call transpersonal psychology, shadow work, and different modalities of spiritual awakening and that stuff, so that when people are talking to you, they don't think you're crazy, because you're not. There is nothing wrong with you. Right? Now, for me, that is what Spirit and Coffee is for. It's for people who are sort of in this, because spiritual alchemy takes every process to it's not just one thing. It's not, oh, well, it's Christian, oh, it's Buddhist, oh, it's Hindu. No, it looks at the alchemic process that happens within us. Now, every system within the field of religion or religious practice has a system for transcendence. I mean, that's really what it's about, right? If you look deep into religion, is what it's trying to do at the root of it is to get people to transcend or to reach non-ordinary states of consciousness. So it's having you or to dig into the shadow side of who you are. So if you say there's a classification of spiritual religious problem, non-pathological V code, which may be focus on the treatment, this represents a considerable change in attitudes in the mental health community toward religion and spirituality. Did not know this. And super excited about it. And obviously the only one, because there's absolutely no one on this podcast right now, which is fine. Just talk to myself. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about it for the people that do perhaps happen to tune in and listen to this. Why? Because now at least we're changing the mindset of the field of mental health. I mean, it is amazing. And it's a phenomenon. It's great that we can start to recognize and honor that not everything is like, oh, they're a mental case, something's wrong with them, but we can look at it from the spiritual perspective and we can honor that, because there are these things we call the non-ordinary states of consciousness. You can call them epiphanies, you could call them spiritual awareness or awakenings, whatever it is that you call it, right? There's different names to describe it. But there are these things that we all of a sudden have these aha moments that we can't really describe. Or we have these non-ordinary states of consciousness. I kind of like that terminology, where we can't really explain it. It's the glitch in the matrix where we witness or we view or internally inside of us, we start to see things in a way, or we have this vision or this arising or emerging of this spiritual sensation, feeling, or experience that happens within us. And when that thing emerges, it's like, how do we describe it? Well, there are no words. It's almost like your dreams. Your dreams sometimes have no words. They're just images, but you can't really describe what's happening, right? You can't really say, well, here's what's happening. Hey, ADHD strengths. It's kind of funny. I do work with people with mental, quote unquote, mental illness or in the health community, mental health community. It would be amazing if you did, because I'm sort of talking about that right now, the mental health community, and I'm not sure if that's what if you work with individuals. Oh, you got off. Okay. So again, it's this emergence of the spiritual awakening, and in that spiritual emergence and that spiritual awakening, we don't have the words to describe it. So sometimes we keep those things to ourselves. We don't explain, because first of all, we can't explain it. Secondly, if we did explain it, people might call us crazy. They might say, good morning, Mustafa. They would say, you're crazy. What's going on with you, right? They may not believe what we're talking about. Good morning, Tomo 24. So this is a change and a shift in the minds of those that are working in the mental health community, because it allows them to open up their mind to understand that not everything, there are glitches. There are these spiritual emergences that we have, these awakenings, and especially now with what's going on. There is right now in the world, people are confused about what to do in the world right now. Everybody's everywhere. There's so much, there's so many difference of opinion. There's people that, this, that, it's divide and conquer. I mean, we just have brought troops back, from Afghanistan. There's so many world issues going on. And as that happens, and as we are starting to wake up the consciousness, there's a lot of murky murk showing up. There's a lot of ugliness showing up, if you will. We can call it ugliness if we want. Okay. I'm going to say ugliness. And as that ugliness or that murky, dirty, whatever starts to arise, the things that we don't want to look at start to arise. Some people wake up and they have an epiphany. They have a spiritual epiphany, a spiritual awakening. And then they don't know where to go because their friends and family want them to agree with them or be the same as them, but they don't. They don't see it the same anymore. All of a sudden, something went off in them. And they're like, no, I'll never go back. This is who I am now. Where do we find a place, a platform to discover and unfold those things? Because it's really hard. We don't have the words sometimes yet. And if we speak about it, people may get upset with us. And I think a lot of us are afraid to, talk about it. I think a lot of us are afraid to say, here's what's going on with me. Because why? Because they might ostracize you. They might spit you out. Society might not even care to talk to you about it. Or your friends and family might just throw you out. And then if you go to a doctor, they're going to say you're crazy and admit you into the hospital. We don't talk about this enough. We don't talk about our spiritual emergence and our non-ordinary states of consciousness. We're accepting it more, but notice even in the community of people who have these abilities, right? Psychic abilities, or tap into their psyche and understand how to utilize it, have clairvoyance, have the power of prophecy. When we start to look at these individuals, sometimes they're called crazy. Sometimes they're called whatever they are, right? They're called all these names, and it's hard for them to get the word out because most people aren't going to listen. They're going to say you're crazy, point fingers. So I feel like this is pretty awesome that at least now in the Western world, at least our therapist, good morning on Facebook. I don't know who's on here. I can't see. Please say good morning to me. At least we are starting to understand and say, okay, there's something, good morning, James, something going on here, and we can maybe support that. Now, there's a couple of issues with this particular type of treatment, and that's because you can't, when someone's having a spiritual experience or an epiphany or an awakening, everybody's different. Nobody's having the same experience, right? Like I can't go into James' body and say, yo, I know what you're feeling. That would be a lie. I don't know. I don't know what you're experiencing. I can't say that. I can only listen to how you describe it. And what words you use is really, it's going to determine how I view those words is really going to determine how I relate to you. So it's really hard to put this into a box, right? You can't just say someone's having a spiritual emergency and they've just had an awakening and everything in their life is changing, and we can't just put it in a box and say, well, this is what it is. That just doesn't work that way. So it's really hard. How do you diagnose somebody with a spiritual emergency? You can't. The individual themselves gets to lead their own spiritual journey. Now with guidance, right, you can blossom into what they call the lotus, right? A lotus just blossoms out of it. So there's a couple of challenges to this. So it says, despite the inclusion of this code, the DSM-4, there's been little impact upon the clinical practice in terms of how the mental health field as a whole treats spiritual emergency. In part, this is due to the lack of training and education about this process in the mental health field. And in part of this is due to the confusion that exists about the phenomena itself, which is where I think I could do some work and some support when I get my PhD, is to go out and train and teach people in the mental health field how to support those individuals into guiding them. And that is what I'm here. That's what Spirit and Coffee does anyway. I naturally do that. I guide people through their spiritual emergencies. And let me tell you, there's some from all over, which is why spiritual alchemy is probably the best practice in order to support those. And I don't want to say treat them, but support them through the process of their spiritual emergency. It's really quite awesome, actually, because it honors every process, every religion. It honors all of it. See, spiritual alchemy is not just one thing. Spiritual alchemy is not just the good parts. It also takes in the bad, and it utilizes it all. It's like the earth. The earth itself, dog shit on the earth, and the earth doesn't just reject it. The earth absorbs it, right? And the earth uses it, breaks it down and reuses it. The earth takes the trash. If we were to go away, the earth would use the trash. Now people say, well, what about the nuclear warheads and nuclear all this and that? Yeah, you're right. We could kill off things with all of this stuff. However, the earth will still exist. It may not exist the way we think it should exist with plants and animals, but it would still be a planet and still be earth. She just maybe would be barren, not able to give of life, but still existing. It's like, so again, we cannot say how the spiritual emergency unfolds in every individual. However, I feel that under the umbrella of spiritual alchemy, that we can then start to train people in the mental health community towards treating individuals who are going through a religious and spiritual awakening, and how to support them. This is going to happen a lot more, to be honest with you, as time goes on. We're in a state of complete meltdown around the globe. And by the way, I do want to honor that. I typically don't talk about, I try to stay out of the political arena and what's going on, but it's too much. People are starting to fall back into this fear of what's to come, because of everything that has been bombarded and thrown at them. The COVID, the masks, the troops out of Afghanistan, China. There are so many things that are happening right now that people are on edge. And as people are on edge, they are going to be pulling and gnawing and trying to figure out who they are and how they exist in this world. There's going to be spiritual emergency all over the place. It is going to happen because really, when we think about it, yes, we're in a physical sort of war, but in our minds, we're in a mental warfare. We're in a spiritual warfare battle right now. We're in a paradigm shift. We're in a worldview shift and change of consciousness. That worldview that we're shifting into is not easy. Some people are trying to hold on to the old worldview. It's part of it. People don't want to ride the wave. They want to stay in the old. Things are going to change. That's part of life. And we're in a big change and transformation right now. One that's so uncomfortable to mostly everybody on the planet. Everybody is experiencing the true discomfort of change. Now, there are minor changes in our life, but this is huge. This is a vast change. It's not something tiny or small. It's something that it's magnificent, right? It's huge. It has magnitude. And our minds, right, to be free, what's going to happen is a spiritual emergence that people are either going to be called back to their old spiritual practices, or they're going to take on new spiritual practices and they're going to let go of their old ones, or they're going to be questioning, well, do I believe this or that anymore? I don't know what I believe. They're going to be lost and confused, and then boom, an epiphany is going to happen, and they're going to say, well, now I believe this. And those individuals, right, might think they're going crazy. And their people may not support them with their worldview. I've had so many people come on here and say, I've had an awakening. And now my family doesn't get me. That happens all the time. That's part of it. There's part of this disconnect from the old programming into new programming, and the old programming doesn't like it. They want you back. They want the old you back. They're like, we need the old you back. Well, what is the old you? Maybe the old you was never you. You were just submitting into what everybody thought you should be. But the reality is the real you, the true version of you, is really emerging from yourself, from the core of who you are. And now people don't want you to be that because they're used to you this way. Like you've been put into this nice little box. Okay, so there are some issues with this particular, like I said, and it's because they don't know. There's categories that they've put it into spiritual emergency, in which there are 10 categories of spiritual emergency, and there's a shamanic crisis, the awakening of the Kundalini, episodes of unitive consciousness, psychological renewal through return to center. Um, um, this is a particular form of psychosis, the crisis of psychic opening, past life experiences, communication with spirits and guides, and channeling, near death experiences, encounters with UFOs, and possession states. These categories are phenomenologically descriptions based on how people undergo a spiritual emergency described them. No claims are made for their objective validity. So the 20, and then Lukoff, and Turner, which these are the some people have done some research on it, list 23 categories of spiritual emergency, adding such things as loss of faith, joining or leaving new religions or movement or old cult. That's a big one. If you're joining a new faith or leaving a cult, there's a lot of stuff that's happening for you and that spiritual emergence, right? A lot of different programming that needs to be undone or redone or whatever. Questioning of spiritual values, meditation related problems, mediation, mediation related problems, and others are, so there's other mental disorders, right? And first of all, I don't like it's called mental disorders because it's not a disorder, but that is how they word it in these things. And the mental illness, I don't believe it, but I think mental wellness and mental health is a better way to say it. How do we foster wellness and health in our mental world? So again, there's a bunch of different ways that they diagnose it and support it. And I guess the biggest issue is that it's not common to the mental wellness or mental health field. So, but it is there. So look into that, especially in the Western world. Now, I don't know, like I said, about other places. Like I doubt this is the same around the world. This is just probably Western because we have I don't know that we have systems in place like everywhere else. I think ours are a little wonky, but that's another day. So there you go. There you have it. And I highly recommend that, if you know somebody, it's kind of hard because today, not a huge audience. But it is something that I feel is important to speak about. But if there are people who listen later and they know somebody who's going through a spiritual emergency, well, number one, I'm here. I can support individuals to at least guide them on what the next steps might be for them, right? To really dig deeper to figure out how they move forward. But if it's someone who does have insurance, has already seen a psychologist, a psychiatrist, they can ask those individuals, and like I said, in the Western world, they can ask if there's a way to be diagnosed with this spiritual or religious problems. And I don't know if it's a problem. I don't know about that word, but that's what they call it. Okay. I didn't make up the words, they did. Spiritual religious problem. I would say spiritual or religious transformation or change. But I guess they have to put the word problem in order for it to be diagnosed as a spiritual emergency. So if you know somebody, please share this with them. This helps because sometimes people are so lost when they go through this spiritual awakening. They don't know where to go. They don't even know what to listen to. They don't even know what the next step is for them. And so this is an opportunity for them to say, can I work with somebody to guide me through this? You can also work with me. I'm a life coach, and I do support people through their transitions and transformations in this. So there you go. I think this is a great article, and it's an integral approach to spiritual emergency, I believe it's called. Yeah, an integral approach to spiritual emergency. And I'll read it. Let's see what this says. One of the most dramatic and fascinating ways that psychology and spirituality come together is in the phenomena of spiritual emergency. This appendix brings the integral model to bear on the issue of spiritual emergency in the hopes of bringing some theoretical order and clarity to this puzzling experience. Kind of hard to come to an order on something that is non-ordinary. But we got to try to make sense of it so we can support people that may need support. So there you go. So I highly recommend that. I don't know if you guys can find this particular article online. And I can ask if I can share it if you guys are interested in reading it. But the reality is we do have a place in which we can talk to these individuals and reshape the mindset of these psychologists, right, in the psychiatry, and say, hey, there is this thing such as spiritual emergency or spiritual awakening that needs to be addressed, and they can support you with that. And again, I'm here for that as well. Good morning, Ashley. Good morning. So you guys are welcome to, I hope, share this, or if you don't share this podcast, and for those of you just joining, go back. If you don't share this podcast, that's fine, but at least share the information, because I feel like I didn't even know it existed. And I think it's really a powerful transformation and change in the Western mindset that we do. The mental health field is at least trying to accept and acknowledge that you're not crazy for having spiritual awakenings. And they're starting to recognize it and not say, we're going to put you on a table and shock you 100 times to make you think the way we think you should. It says, oh, okay, what's going on? Let's support this individual through the process. So there you have it. Love you guys. Bunches. Please, you guys, keep yourself safe. I know a lot's going on right now. And I know that it's something I'm going to have to address on Spirit and Coffee, just because I feel I can sense that individuals are starting to freak out again and maybe panic a little bit about what's happening in the world. And just to spread the love and remember not to be afraid, that everything is perfectly perfect and it's designed a certain way. And it's sometimes, and we know life is not easy. It's not. This world is not easy. Living in a human body is not easy. So you're not going crazy if you feel like it's too much, because it is. And that's the reality. And if we can accept that and say that together, I think we can start to heal together. So life is a lot. It is. So I pray for you, for your families, for the protection of all that are around you. I pray for the love and guidance, and that God, Spirit, whatever you call it, Creator, all that is good be provided for you and your families, and that you heal through these times, and that you remember that fear is just a construct of the ego, and that we can transcend that. There's a way to transcend that. Okay, so hopefully this helps. All right, so I love you guys. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye bye.